you're a Pittsburgh baseball fan, then this is the podcast for you. Make your way down, grab a beverage, and get ready to talk Pirates with myself, Craig Toth, and Scott Jackson, two of the biggest fans you'll ever meet. This is Bucks in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
If the Pirates didn't pull this game out tonight, I'm not sure if I could have mustered myself or mustered the courage or whatever it would be to be able to record this podcast. Because I mean, it's been pretty rough to watch recently, but we're Pirates fans, myself and Scott. We're here. We're gonna talk some Pirates. Scott, how you doing, brother?
I'm pretty good. Yeah, if Baker would have hit that walk-off home run, I probably would have called in sick. Oh, yeah, I just can't do it tonight, Craig. I was thinking, has it really only been a week since we last talked? Because when the Pirates are losing and you're watching bad baseball, the time just crawls by.
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, just games that you think you should win, games that you're in till the end, but you really don't feel like that your team has a chance to win. I mean, that is just I feel like one of the ultimate frustrations. And I keep on going back. I forget who did the quote at this point in time. I think it was Bill James, is that, if your team is hovering around where the Pirates are, you're like kind of living and dying with like each game, with each pitch. You are looking back on games that were blown. I mean, especially during you know, that free fall that they had, losing like 10 straight, 11 out of 12, and looking at if you could have, just won some games here and there. I mean, even in this stretch where there has been some really bad baseball played, for September, they're still hovering around like around a 500 mark, which they had done for the majority of the season outside of, pretty much like a 2 week span where the season goes in the tank. But even with that, if they had stayed at a 500 mark, we would be the St. Louis Cardinals, which I'm pretty sure if you polled, Cardinals fans, I mean, obviously Cardinals fans are different than Pirates fans in that they have been used to winning for the past decade, where, Pirates fans have not. But I mean, they still wouldn't be much happier with the season because the Cardinals were a team that people had finishing towards the bottom, and they're going to finish, at least somewhere in the middle, but they don't see it as a victory as well. So, I mean, if we end up getting, say, 74 wins as opposed to, 80 wins, I'm not sure how much better I would really feel about the season.
Is this where you pull out the Ricky Bobby quote? If you're not first, you're last. Because if you're not a playoff team, then it doesn't matter. But I do think there's some pride in it. I just don't want to be in the cellar again for the Central. We've never won the division. We've never won the National League Central in the entire time that the Central has been around. But even though this season is lost, I think that there's some pride in finishing ahead of teams like the Reds, the Cardinals, if for no other reason, make you feel like you're ahead of them in the rebuild.
I can't disagree with you there, and especially since the Reds started their rebuild a little bit after we did. The Cardinals are never probably going to do a full rebuild. It's going to be more of that retool and try to, fill in with veterans, even though a lot of their, major players are veterans. But for the Pirates, I mean, it's kind of crazy at this point in time. A guy that has, had a lot of eyes on him, we will say, and his play in the outfield, Brian Reynolds at this point in time is a veteran. I mean, I look back to, when he burst onto the scene, he wasn't the guy that everybody was looking for. I mean, at that point in time, it was Cole Tucker. It was based on those, prospect rankings and different type of stuff. But it's only been a few years. I mean, obviously Reynolds was more of the, I wouldn't say late bloomer. He was a college bat. So, he was naturally going to be older, came up a little bit earlier than some people had him doing. And if, Eric Gonzalez doesn't go into the outfield and not really knowing what he's doing, it could have been a few more months before we would see Brian Reynolds.
He
But
jumped.
Brian
He jumped
Reynolds,
from Double A, right?
I think he was in AAA, I do believe, for like a hot minute. I
Mhm.
don't think it was for very long. It's honestly, it probably was like maybe like 12 to 13 games. While you're talking at one of these points in time, I'm gonna go back and look at it because it didn't really seem like he was in Indianapolis. All of his stuff. And I look towards like all the souvenir cups that I have and different stuff is from Altoona because he had, been one of the major acquisitions. So they kind of put him on, all of that stuff with Cole Tucker at that time. But I mean, for Brian Reynolds, it's a hotly contested debate. I'm going to give a shout out to my buddy PNC Yark, one of the greatest names on Twitter for a Pirates fan, has been calling for Brian Reynolds to be the first baseman for the Pirates for the future. For I mean, I'd have to look back, but it's been at least over a year, if not longer. I know he was having those discussions when there was the stuff going on with the Brian Reynolds extension. And we come to find out, from Shelton that Reynolds has been talking about this for, Shelton says, for like 3 years. Uh, he's played well enough at times. The arm has been really good. Outfield assists have always been high. So, and he knows where to throw the ball. It's just the range. I mean, everybody's kind of said it, and Scott, you can kind of probably echo this, is that when you're watching a game, I mean, outside of him thinking he caught a fly ball at the wall and, everybody jumping on Twitter and basically saying, oh, that's why he's, going to first base. It's more about the range. Like it's not like he's making the bad plays. It's just that he's not, kind of getting to balls that he should.
Yeah, I think he's lost a step in that situation and in that regard. We He was our center fielder, and he was never the speedy, cover a ton of ground center field. And in PNC Park, as they've said many times, you almost need two center fielders: someone to cover left field, someone to cover center field. Um, and I don't think that he has that anymore. He's more of the like when Corey Dickerson was in Pittsburgh. You could get cut the ball off, get the ball in fast, but he's not going to make the spectacular plays with the big range. Like you said, he's not going to doesn't really rob home runs. He doesn't get back to the wall, quite as much as other fielders that we've seen. And so I think that him moving into first base, when you look project with the free agent class and take a look at who is going to be available and at what cost, it maybe isn't a bad idea to move a guy that you have locked up for years to a position as long as he's comfortable with that. As long as because these are all professional athletes, these are the best of the best. If he puts in the work, I'm sure he can make it work. But if he's comfortable with moving there, then you lock down a position that can be hard to fill. And there, frankly, are a lot more outfielders out there that can be picked up. And so, in the construction of a roster, this is a move that really could help the Pirates long term.
And I just looked this up. He had 13 games and 56 plate appearances in Indianapolis. And that's probably why it seems like he made that jump because he really
Mhm.
did. I mean, 13 games, 56 plate appearances is not even really even getting your feet wet at the level.
Right.
Um, I looked up this is a metric that like a lot of people, you know, It's a newer metric. It's not something that, people look towards. I mean, it is what, Fangraphs kind of uses as, you know, creating their, like, defensive war and stuff, and that's the jump metric. And the jump metric is pretty much like, in the simple way to say it is, there's like your reaction time to the ball, there is your burst to the ball because there's guys that have good speed, and then it's your route to the ball. And of qualified outfielders, because this is only outfielders. It's an out. It's a. I think this came out in probably like 2020. I'm thinking because I believe it kind of came out around the pandemic. Because I remember, I mean, during that time, there was the only thing was to look at like old stats and different stuff. Is that Brian Reynolds ranks 88th out of 107 in that metric, and a lot of it has to do with his reaction time and his burst not being there. So it's basically kind of what we're saying. The routes that he takes to the ball, like he once he sees where it's at, he knows where to kind of go and field it, where to put it up. The reaction is a negative, 1.3. The burst is a negative 0.5, which, I mean, the reaction time ranks in like the bottom like three or four guys like in the league. So it's just more of him kind of getting that instant recognition, getting that burst, but then once he kind of sees it, he can put himself in a good spot. The other thing I kind of looked at, like overall, and I was having a conversation on X. Don't have too many out there. Anybody that follows me, you're going to get a lot of just like retweets and different stuff. It's like, okay, you may not have seen this, and you can't follow everybody, so that kind of stuff. But it had a discussion of and it started with O'Neill Cruz and where he kind of like fits in because they're like, shortstop is a place where if you have a lot of offense, then that can put you in a good position. So it's not a well known offensive position, but what people haven't really noticed is that over the past few years, teams have been putting a lot of offensive minded players into that position. I mean, you could just basically look at the Orioles, you can look at the Royals.
Right.
A lot of these younger guys that are coming up are going into that position, so they're kind of going that direction. Right now, with Ono Cruz, he is the 11th ranked shortstop as far as F WAR, which is not bad.
Right. Yeah.
But center field, even if he plays an average to slightly below average center field, which we've seen at times, like he will make a ridiculous play. Other times he, will take a bad route to the ball. I mean, that can be improved upon. But even if he plays average, he's a top five center fielder right now by WAR in Major League Baseball. And that is also a pretty big thing. And the same thing would go for Reynolds. That's where my conversation with this person went. Was I was just like, maybe let me take a look. A player that has greater than 350 plate appearances. I know that it's not qualified, but for me, 350 means you've spent a decent amount of times in the majors this year. You are teetering possibly on being a bench player, but could be a regular starter. Brian Reynolds is the 17th ranked left fielder in baseball with 2.2 F WAR. He's ninth in offense. He is 35th, dead last out of those players with 350 plate appearances. He's got a 119 WRC plus, which is 13th, an OPS sitting around 800, which is ninth. If you put him right now at first base and he plays league average first base, which I think a player of Brian Reynolds' caliber, athleticism,
Right.
It's not saying that he's not, when we're saying he's not got doesn't have reaction time, doesn't have speed. Some of that can be slowed down a little bit at first base. He would be the fifth best first baseman in the majors by F WAR based on offense, and he is only zero point 0.1 points behind Pete Alonso at that point in time. What do you think
Okay.
about all that, Scott? That's a lot
Yeah.
of numbers I'm throwing at you.
That's a lot. Um, okay. Yeah, I follow you there. Yeah, I think the fact is, can he play that position? But I mean, Rowdy Tellez plays that position, and he's not exactly the height of athleticism. But he does. He's a good defensive. By looking at him, you wouldn't think that he's as good of a defensive first baseman as he is. But yeah, I think that's what's exciting about baseball in the off season is that your mind can start working in these kind of what if th- these scenarios, because these guys put in a lot of work. Uh, a casual fan might think that these guys just go sit on the couch and watch football for the off season, but that's not what's going on. These guys are putting in a lot of work to hone their skills and get better at their craft. And I think that if he focuses on that defensive work, we could really see him show up to spring training with a first baseman's glove. And like you said, be one of the top first basemen in the league. But the question then is, how does everything fall with the rest of the roster? Because you have some guys that, for positional and defensive reasons, and fairly or not, they're being looked at for first base. Is Endy going to end up at first base? I mean, that's one of the positions that he's playing currently. Um, is Henry Davis a fit there? Because we really don't know what to do with him defensively. I think that the bat will come around if he gets comfortable in the right circumstances. He just works too hard for it not to. So you don't want to. If I think Brian Reynolds is, like we've always said, like in the last few weeks, Brian Reynolds is your rock. He's your constant. You know what you're going to get out of him. But is that a partially a product of him being penciled in every single day and knowing where he's going to be? You don't want to shift him around too much. I don't think you want to do the Connor Joe thing with Brian Reynolds, with one of your stars. I don't think you want to play him DH a day or two a week and have him at first base a couple of days and then left field. You just don't want to be moving him around. I think Brian Reynolds is the kind of guy that needs to be, penciled in, written with pen in that number two spot most days, if not every day of the season. And he needs to know where he's playing defensively.
I think that a lot of Pirates fans, I mean, look to basically say, Brian Reynolds is our all-star left fielder. And there's nothing wrong with that. And there's, kind of frustrated with the Pirates in general. I think they could come around to this idea more. It's coming, directly after moving O'Neill Cruz off a
Mhm.
shortstop to center field. And if this was something that, you know, maybe was out there a little bit more, I mean, obviously, if he's talking to Shelton about it for the past 3 years, you would think that at some point in time, even though it's just, us fans on Twitter kind of talking about it, that it may have picked up a little bit more steam, that somebody would have asked about it before this, um, until you actually saw him do it. But I could also see why they wouldn't ask, because if you don't see him playing the position, wouldn't why would you ask? Would Brian Reynolds move to first base? But for me, if he's buying into it, just like O'Neill Cruz seems to be buying into center field, I don't see any harm in trying it out. I mean, like you said, especially in an off season, especially with a spring training, and we will be able to see, and they will be able to see, more importantly, kind of how it works out. And if it's not working out, then guess what? He still has a position on the team. It's not like that. It's like, we don't know what to do with him. He would probably more than likely, end up out in left field more days than not. We've talked about this. I would like to see him out in right field a little bit more, which was something they kind of seem to be doing. I mean, we talked about this. You brought in, Michael A. Taylor. The first game he's down there in spring training, Brian Reynolds is in right field, and then we really hardly ever see it, you know, for the rest of the season. That may be something where you could also save his legs. You wouldn't be looking for as much range, as much reaction time. And he has the arm for it because he's shown that he has that. But you mentioned Endy, man, and that's something that we had written down here. I mean, Endy in Indianapolis at the moment, to me, I just have to like kind of like I'm just shaking my head a little bit thinking about the fact that he's actually playing this year.
Yeah,
And it's not shaking my head in a bad way. It's just kind of shaking my head to like,
astonishment. Yeah,
yeah, astonishment and get myself back into reality. And to me, it's like, I don't even really, I mean, he had a home run the other night, which is great to see. For me, it's just more of, him being on the field, him being comfortable, him talking about, he was worried about making that first throw to second base just because, I mean, you have a reconstructed body part. I mean, and you don't want to push it and you don't want to see yourself take a step back. Andy, obviously a competitor. Even from his time in Bradenton, I can remember talking to, I think it was Ben Picorni, who was the voice of the Marauders at that point in time, that just basically said from the moment he showed up, might have been even Spencer Smith. I can't remember now. They've had three different guys for 3 years, but just basically said that Endy was the guy that was the leader in the clubhouse, was always competitive, was always like the voice that you would hear throughout the game. So for me, just seeing him in those games, but I am also just kind of taking a step back and looking at, I think I wrote down, using pen or pencil with Endy. And right now, I might be using something that is definitely erasable, just because even if he plays a little bit this season, I see people like, penciling him or penning him into first base, backup catcher, different stuff like that to start the season. I just can't do that yet.
yeah. I think that we learned the lesson with Henry Davis because we had that in our mind, especially after the spring. He actually showed something. But with Endy, it's all hypothetical. And like you said, we didn't expect him to play this year. So anything that he does is just icing on the cake. Yeah, I thought that he would be done for the whole year, and I was okay with that. I'd come to terms with that because his health long term is going to be the most important thing. But as far as being the leader, I think we saw even as a rookie last year him coming up and the way he was talking to the pitchers. It seemed like he and Oviedo had quite the connection there. He was able to settle pitchers down, he made good decisions on mound visits, calling games. So I think that his bat is going to be an important part of it because we've seen the Pirates do struggle in that situation. I think the defense is going to be there, and I, yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to him starting the season in the minors in AAA just to make sure that he's back. But I do think that he is going to be an important part going forward, and I could see him. Well, let's think of it this way: Henry Davis, like we said, is a wild card. We don't know where he's going to fit in now. Joey Bart has entrenched himself. You got to think as the starting catcher next year, and then do you have Henry as the backup? Do you have Endy as do Henry and Endy split the backup responsibilities and then play other positions? What does that mean for the Pirates for free agency? And I know we're going to have a long offseason to discuss all these possibilities, but I really think that it's good to see Endy back, and I'm just enjoying seeing him on the field and knowing that he's showing that he's getting healthy. Um, but yeah, he has more to show before I'm ready to, come April, have him in the lineup for sure.
The one thing you said right there is the ability to command, the pitching staff and to command the game. And that's something that Andy, based on everything has been able to show. And a lot of, I mean, I go off of WAR a lot, and he had like a point 0.6, WAR on the season last year in the majors. and that was almost primarily, his defense. 204 plate appearances slash 220, 284, 328, three home runs. Never could really get that going offensively. And even, in the minors last year, 315 plate appearances in AAA, 268, 356, 415, six home runs. You know, we I think that some fans, and I think myself and as well, because I am a fan, I try to take that hat off as much as possible. We remember 2022 Endy a lot more than we remember 2023 Endy. And I think that what he did in 2023 was good for his growth. I think his time in the majors was good for his growth.
Mhm.
And getting, everybody talks about, getting that feet wet, seeing what he can do well. But, 2022 Endy through three levels that he flew up through, I, I can't believe this. I looked back on this. 531 plate appearances slashed 323, 4, 407, 590 with 25 home runs and just hit better and better each level he came up. And I do still believe that a lot of that is still in there. It's just that, I mean, last year was the first year where he was asked to focus on catching primarily. And we've seen with other players that that is a lot because it's game planning. It's,
Right.
not only knowing your pitchers, but knowing the opposing hitters, knowing their tendencies, knowing, you know, if a relief pitcher comes in, what is his best pitch? Where can he throw it against this type of person? So I think that Andy will adjust to that. I'm just kind of, pumping the brakes just a little bit. I mean, not
Yeah.
a ton. Like, I don't want people to think that I'm like, poo-pooing Endy or whatever. But when I see, stuff come out and it's just like, well, and he could possibly, play some first base to spell Brian Reynolds because I think he's still going to need some DH. I think that, it's a possibility that you may have to carry, three catchers. And in some instances, that isn't three catchers because Endy can play other positions. Uh, you know, Joey Bart obviously can't at this point in time. I've seen people throw out first base to there. But for me, it's just like, okay, it's more important that the kind of the bat comes along for both of them. And we were like, this is a terrible segue, but talking about like bringing players along and bringing them along, maybe not slowly, but just kind of like following what they tell you. Last week, we have to bring this up this week because you had talked to me about Bubba Chandler, and it's somebody that we absolutely do need to talk about. And what the Pirates have done with him. They've actually been very aggressive with Bubba Chandler, and he has given them no reason to not be aggressive with him. I mean, we're only looking at I believe it would be the second full season where he is primarily a pitcher.
Yeah.
Last season was the first year in Greensboro, got bumped up to Altoona for his 21st birthday. And then now only the second full season where he is primarily a pitcher. And he's just been amazing. So, Scott, I'm going to let you ramble on here a little bit about Bubba because you were the one that I felt bad we didn't get to bring it up, last week.
Yeah. Um, Bubba, I mean, that's going to go down as a big get for Charrington. That decision that he made to not pursue football, mostly because they gave him the opportunity to be a two-way player. That was important to Bubba. And then, as you said, before last season, seeing that if he focused on his pitching, that he would develop faster, and he left the bat behind. Um, and I know he didn't have the best start his last start, but he still went 5 and a third, I think Hannah was talking about it on the broadcast today. 8 strikeouts. I think he gave up like 7 hits over 5 1/3. But prior to that start, so I had some notes from last week. 4-0 with a 1.59 ERA in 6 starts, 34 innings pitched. Only one home run given up. Uh, 13 walks to 46 strikeouts at AAA. I I think that we're seeing him assert himself, and these players. They talk about player centric philosophy with Charrington. I think that Chandler's showing that he can handle the promotions, and he might be a guy that gets that cup of coffee in the majors, like we saw with Rowansi a few years ago. Maybe that last weekend they throw him a start just as here's a little teaser for next year, because it's possible that he ends up in the same position as Jared Jones, where he's competing for a starting rotation job in spring training if they want to allow the service time clock to start. But that's going to be a decision for the front office to make, because I think that he's going to be a player come spring training.
The only thing that would stop him from, getting that cup of coffee that you speak of would be him not, needing a 40-man spot. And
Mm.
and this has nothing to do with Bubba. It has more to do with Charrington. And, if Charrington remains in place, and that's like a slight if, I believe, at this point in time. I still think that Charrington will be retained. I'm not sure about Shelton. I do believe that Andy Haynes would probably be gone. Um, and I don't know how much that would change things, because I feel like this is a Charrington philosophy on hitting, not just an Andy Haynes philosophy on hitting. But that's that could be a 2 hour long podcast in itself. But Charrington has just basically shown that he is very particular and very cautious with those 40-man spots. I mean, there were spots for Billy Cook and Nick York for about a week there, I believe it was. We were sitting at like 38, uh, on the 40 man, and did not pull the trigger on that. I feel like some of that was because he's looking for some of these waiver wire claims, like picking up like a Joey Wentz. And that's something that he has shown that he will do. And, sometimes it works out for him. I mean, you look at Dennis Santana, when we picked him up, I don't think that anybody was, fully on board with, what Dennis Santana could do. I mean, we had seen what he had done with the Yankees. He had been, in the majors, in and out since, I believe, like 2018, 2019, had never really stuck with anything. But, for the past month and a half, he's been the best and most reliable reliever in our bullpen. So, I mean, that's where, like, with Charrington, like, he will kind of give these spots up. I was still surprised with both York and Cook being up here. Just because, I mean, I do know they needed those 40-man spots, in the offseason if they were going to try to protect them. But just because Charrington is he's almost, I mean, he's anal retentive if about those 40-man spots, which Joe Q Pirate or Joe Q Public on Facebook would basically be like, I could cut 10 guys off of this team at this point in time and not even really care about it. But it's just more about what I've seen from Charrington. I think Bubba's absolutely done enough. At this point in time, 39.1 innings pitched, 1.83 ERA, 1.042 whip in Indianapolis, striking out guys at a 12.4 per nine clip. Does have a little bit of a walk issue to a degree at times, 3.4, but the man has done everything he's asked of you, has one of the more electric fastballs that I have ever seen in person, on, TV, whatever it may be. It's just absolutely ridiculous. We're gonna have to parlay our bullpen talk to next week, but I would feel remiss if I also did not bring up Thomas Harrington. and what
Absolutely.
he's been doing as well. And it's not to poo poo Bubba whatsoever, but him and Bubba have been like lockstep in a different way, this entire season. Both of them have, dealt with injuries. Bubba's, I guess, what did he say? He fell out of a tree or something, or he got hurt or something. And he broke his elbow, so he has some forearm tightness from time to time. Thomas Harrington dealt with a shoulder at the beginning of the season. Both of them are going to end up, no matter what happens, probably around like 120 to 125 innings pitched for this season. So if we're talking about 2025, I'm bringing, Thomas Harrington, and I will bring that 0.929 whip in Indianapolis anywhere. 1.4 base on balls. Like this guy does not walk anybody, has not walked anybody at any level he's been at. But for me, like this is an abundance of riches that I am, I'm not opposed to this, but I'm also going to caution fans again. I'm
Yeah.
Scott. I'm a glass. I don't know if it's half empty or half full or just cautious. And maybe I'm a little bit too cautious, but I look at, what they do with players. If you're looking at a 25% increase, you're looking at probably around 150 to 155 innings for both of those guys next year. And it gets us back into the Jared Jones conversation that we had at the beginning of the season. The injury kind of, unfortunately did away with that conversation a little bit. But I just want to prepare Pirates fans because I think they're going to kind of get frustrated again.
Yeah. Well, you can never have too much pitching. And so I know that a lot of the conversation about dealing from that depth, um, a lot of people were suggesting that we trade those guys, but I'm so glad that they didn't move Bubba or Harrington, you know, any of those guys because it's going to be important because you never know. Like we saw with Oviedo at the end of the season last year, we thought that he was going to be a big part this year, and they had a huge hole to fill. So you're right. Be cautious. Injuries can happen. Uh, and what you think when it comes to pitching, when you think that you have enough in the matter of a week or two, they can, the baseball gods can show you how wrong you were.
They definitely can, and for right now, I mean, because that's like a conversation that is going to be had, definitely for the offseason. I mean, Luis Ortiz, I just want to praise him for a second for what he's done this year. It's been absolutely amazing. He's actually been better as a starter. I want to look up his numbers while he was pitching tonight. And like I said, I always go to the whip, the walks and hits per innings pitched. The ERA can be, kind of up and down. I do like, the FIP as well, but the whip will kind of tell you, where things go. As a reliever, his whip was sitting around like a 1.31. Even though he was operating more as like a long man type starter, he was doing a lot of times the innings, of a starter. Once he's gone to be a starter, I mean, his whip is like 1.12, 1.03. It kind of fluctuates back up in there. That's reliever numbers
Mhm.
as a starter. I mean, that's the crazy part to me. So you right now have Paul Skeens, Jared Jones, Mitch Keller, Bailey Falter,
Yep. Yep.
who everybody go back and listen to the offseason from this last year when everybody's saying Bailey Falter, DFA him, he's gone, he's whatever. And I'm like, they're going to use him. They keep bringing him up. Like, and if he can figure it out, and he had figured it out for the Phillies because the Phillies used him a lot in previous years, um, I didn't see this. Nobody saw this. But I definitely thought he was going to get some run. And then Luis Ortiz, Bubba Chandler, Thomas Harrington, Braxton Ashcraft, Mike Burrows.
Gross.
I mean, you're going to need all of those guys.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think with Ortiz, I think you can watch the game and see what you're going to get out of him in that first inning. It seems like when he ran into problems, when he didn't have his best stuff, he really got touched up in that first inning. And there were a few games where he did get touched up and then he settled down and still go 5, 6 innings. But you're right. And that's going to work out for the Pirates because of not just service time considerations, but also, as you brought up, managing workload for innings pitched on these arms. You working guys like Chandler and Burrows and Harrington, guys that have had injuries recently, and bringing them up as rookies. You're not going to have to rely on them for the same kind of workload that we thought maybe a Jared Jones was going to get, as you said before, the injury concerns um, coming out of spring training. So maybe you can piggyback those guys a little bit long term for the season. You start one guy in the rotation to begin the year, then maybe figure out a creative way to back off his innings, bring up the next guy in that May, June time when you would normally bring up a rookie that you have high hopes for. You're right. They can work those guys. And I think you bring up a good point with Falter because you're going to have a lefty in the mix. I think that's a not only the extension that has really shown to be very productive for him and helped him a lot to make his fastball play a lot better than it really is, but having a lefty in the lineup in the rotation is going to be an important piece that they look at. And yeah, I was one of those people that in the offseason I thought, oh well, Falter's only going to be here until they decide to call up Skeens. He's going to be the casualty for Skeens or Jones or whoever they decide to bring up first. And I'm happy to say I was wrong about that.
Yeah, I like to be wrong. We all
Exactly.
like to be wrong.
Especially we're pessimistic Pirate fans. Yeah.
Very pessimistic. We will bring a conversation about David Bednar because I feel like we have a lot of time to talk about that.